This episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Michelob Ultra is perfect for more than just the summer heat this year, because not only is it refreshing and crisp with only 95 calories, but Ultra is also the official beer sponsor of Team USA at the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Celebrate every point, race, and moment with Team USA and Michelob Ultra for the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Stock up on Michelob Ultra and cheer on Team USA. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2024 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to Working Overtime, the advice-focused Bad Homburg Open to Working's Wimbledon. I'm your host, Isaac Butler.
And I'm your other host, June Thomas. Isaac, what have you got for us today?
Well, June, what I've got for our listeners today is more of you.
What now?
Look, I realize that you're going through a pretty rarefied experience right now. You are in the midst of the actual book release process. Your book came out last month. You've done a few events. You've got some more on the calendar. This is something that lots of people think about, dream about, think they know things about, worry about. It's something I've been through, and you're right in the middle of it while we were taping this. So I thought, let's demystify the bring your horse to market phase of creative work a bit. What do you say?
I say, what's that thing that you say about actors? They are both the ham hock and the bacon slice. What's that phrase?
The painter and the paint.
Yes, they are the painter and the paint.
But I should have said, do you think the book would have sold better if I had said they're both the ham hock and the bacon slice?
I mean, it would in England, probably.
Well, then it would be like they're both the numbly jumper and the digestive biscuit. All right. So first off, before we dive in, I am curious, what were your thoughts or worries or assumptions, take this however you want, about the book release process before you went through it yourself?
So this may sound weird, but I was worried that I had so much knowledge that I wouldn't be able to enjoy the experience. And by that, I mean, I'd worked in publishing, albeit in a very different time. It was back in the 1990s. And then as a journalist, I wrote about books for many years. I did a couple of podcasts in which I talked to authors on working. I've received advice from you and other people who've launched successful books. So I wasn't coming into this as a wide-eyed rube, to put it in its least positive way. And then that's good. It's good to be prepared. But at the same time, I was aware of not wanting to be such an expert that I didn't get to feel the excitement and to recognize that something I have been dreaming about my whole life was finally happen. I really wanted to be present for that.
Now, how did you do that mentally? Did you just compartmentalize? Were you like, I am now but a babe, a wee bairn in the woods who knows nothing about this publishing process?
I think what I really tried to do was to not be arguing with people who were, telling me things like, I just want to be very clear. I had a fantastic experience with all the people at my publisher in the US, Seal, and also with my British publisher, Virago. So there's not any kind of criticism at all, quite the opposite. But I think there might have been times where I'd be like, you would say that, wouldn't you? Or something and I just had to not even try to do that and just be like, I'm listening to you and I am not going to argue, So that really was mostly the kind of the step that I took to try and address that.
And of course, it is worth noting that a lot of the book release process begins way before the book comes out. You may have had to fill out that insanely involved survey, the marketing survey for your publisher, in which you list every single person you've ever had a more than 3-minute conversation with and how they might help you publicize the book. You try to get it in the hands of as many people as you can. You start talking about it really early on. Are you the kind of person who has hang-ups about doing that kind of work, or about gets a little too vulnerable when you have to talk about something that you've made that you care about, or was that easy for you?
Oh, Isaac, I have so many hang-ups, but fortunately, self-promotion isn't one of them. And I think it helped that I was a writer and an editor when Facebook first came around, which weirdly was a time when a lot of pep talks happened at magazines about blowing your own horn. Because before that point, there wasn't much of a tradition of journalists putting the world on blast about the things they'd written, the podcast episodes they'd made. And I feel fortunate that I had to persuade a lot of writers that they had to do that. And I know that however many years later, probably 20 years later, I don't know, it seems crazy to say what I just said, but because it's not that like writers were shy and retiring or lacked confidence. Right. It wasn't that. It's just that until that time, it just wasn't something that most journalists did. That doesn't mean that everything was straightforward, though. I found, for example, that it was much easier for me to make very specific requests. So, for example, since the pandemic, at least, in-store events have changed a lot. I think until this change happened, most bookstore events were readings. Someone from the store read a short bio, introduce the author would read an excerpt from the book, might be a short Q&A with whoever showed up, and then the author would sign books and it would be over. Now, most bookstore events are conversations rather than readings. And again, to be clear, I think that's a much more interesting format for everyone involved, but thinking who'd be a good partner, asking them, checking in with them beforehand, and then doing the thing is quite a bit of work. I should note here that I'm not a big shot who did a nationwide tour. I did bookstore events in New York, DC, and Edinburgh. And in August, I'll be doing a second round at a festival in Oxfordshire and events in Minneapolis and Chicago. The first round are places where I currently or previously lived, so I handled the partner booking there. But I got a ton of help from the festival and the Midwest bookstores. They have a much better sense of their community. Again, this is something I knew about. I've been the conversation partner at several book launches, but it's just different to be the person, doing that thinking, who would be good, who might be available, and then making those arrangements.
Yeah, I found that I don't have trouble talking about my work, but I do not love asking people for help. That is the thing I have a hang up around, and I've worked very hard on it. And so, for me, it's like writing the person to ask for a blurb, especially if it's like, Nathan Lane or whatever, right? Or talking to people like, hey, do you want to be my event person if they weren't already a close friend, particularly when they're not already a close friend. Yeah. That I found really tricky. Was it like that for you?
No, again, like that bit was okay. And I found even like asking for blurbs, asking to share a stage, an event, that I could figure that out. But there are lots of situations where you can't ask for the thing that you really want. You just cannot ask people to review your book. And people can't review your book anyway. So outside of those specific asks that I did feel comfortable with, you mostly, as you said before, are just trying to get the word out about your book, to remind people it exists, to get it on people's radars. And I think my hang up, to the extent that I had one, was more like this question of like, am I doing everything I could? And of course, you never know, right? Was there something you could have done? Did you miss a trick? You just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like the thing that I started doing whenever possible was to flip the language from asking a favor to offering something on some level. So it's like you're trying to get the book into as many people's hands as possible, right? So I, of course, am not going to write whoever's editing the New York Times book review and be like, can you assign someone to read this or whatever? But, you know, all my friends who worked in media, everyone I knew, and by friends, I also mean like people I was social media mutuals with. I'm not only talking like IRL friends. I write them and just be like, hey, would you like to read a copy of the book? I've got a galley for you if you want it. They are welcome to never respond to that message or to say, no, I've got a really long pile, or to say yes and then not read it. There's actually no obligation on their end at that point. The only obligation is for me to like write the nice letter, sign the thing, slip it in a package and send it to them. Do you know what I mean? So like, absolutely. That was sort of how I tricked myself, I think, into asking for some form of help, or to be on the help train anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think that's very smart.
Anyway, we will be back with more about bringing your work into the public eye after this. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Hey listeners, do you have any tips or questions about the creative process? We would love to answer your questions, elevate your insights, and help you in whatever way we can. You can email us at working@slate.com, or even better, you can call us and leave a message at 304-933-9675. That's 304-933-WORK.
And we are back. June, we were talking before about the pre-release time period. Just emotionally, what was the week leading up to the release? The 3 days before, the 4 days after. What was that experience like for you?
Okay, so I should mention here that there was a very specific source of both excitement and anxiety for me, which was, again, that I was going to be coming to New York and DC, places where I have a lot of friends who I hadn't seen for at least 2 years. When we left New York in 2022, we said goodbye to very few people in person. We didn't have a going away gathering, in part because we were just crazy busy, but also because of COVID. The schedule was so tight. Getting sick would have been disastrous on multiple levels. So I was very conscious that I was finally going to get to see friends again. So that was really huge. That was really looming large, but it also wasn't directly related to the reason for the trip, which was the book. The week or so before the US pub date, I was, preparing for the trip. I had a bunch of interviews. I wrote a couple of pieces for publications related to the book. And then there was something else that kept me busy, and I was very grateful for it. It was a very welcome distraction because it was both work and it kept me from overthinking the upcoming trip and the publication. And that was that I was recording the audiobook. So the contract for the audiobook was delayed. My book's pub date was May 28th, but the audiobook won't be out until July 30th. So I was recording the audio in my last days in the UK. And in many ways, it would have been great if everything had come out on the same day. But I was not so secretly glad to have a really important task that I needed to focus on and do well. As I said, that kept me from overthinking.
Yeah, totally. One of the things people overthink about a lot, of course, is reviews. Some people read them, some people don't. I have a friend who can't not read them, but is also driven insane by them. So she has a friend call her and read them to her.
Oh my God.
To talk her down from seeing all the insults lurking behind every compliment. What is that like for you?
Okay, so this gets to something that is probably my biggest, let's just say it, learning from this experience. The whole experience has been incredibly positive. I got amazing blurbs, including from people I don't know. You know, my UK publisher got some amazing people to blurb me. You know, people I really admire, like Tegan Quinn and Sarah Waters and Val McDermott and others more. And I did some fantastic interviews with people who clearly read and appreciated the book. I got great reviews in the trade press, places like Kirkus and Booklist. And I was in the top right corner of New York Magazine's approval matrix at the very intersection of brilliant and highbrow.
That's every writer's dream right there.
I know, I made my agent so happy with that. But I haven't had many mainstream reviews. You know, one that I got, the New York Times, which, let's face it.
Oh, just the New York Times.
Pretty important one, was absolutely glowing. I couldn't have written a better one myself. But that was kind of it. So what is this thing I've learned? It's about myself. That instead of focusing on all the fantastic things that have happened, and these things have all been fantastic, I am going to obsess about that one slightly disappointing thing, which is not even getting a bad review or even a mediocre review. It's just that I didn't get that many reviews. And I know this is dumb, but there you go.
I will say one thing that I learned when my book came out is that reviews do not always come as close to pub day as you think they will. So there is a chance that other reviews will come, and, you know, places with a longer lead time, like, I don't know, Booklist or the London Review of Books or whatever it is. Like, some of mine came weeks or even months after the book came out. And we're talking about in like larger outlets. I had the exact same experience. The reviews were wonderful. The response was wonderful. There's like 5% of me or whatever that is still hung up on the fact that Publishers Weekly never reviewed it, which is weird because they're the industry trade magazine that reviews every single book. Now, I'm sure, having been behind the scenes as a reviewer, what happened is a freelancer was assigned it and shat the bed and just didn't turn it in. And so like they had to move on. It's Publishers Weekly. But it's just very funny to me that I would care about that at this point years later at all. You know what I mean?
Totally. The same thing happened to me. I was on 2 lists on Publishers Weekly, like really great lists, like the 10 best nonfiction books of the summer, but there was no review. Nobody sees it anyway. Why do I care?
It's an industry trade magazine.
Exactly. We're irrational creatures. Yeah.
Yes, it's totally true. It's totally true. And I think both of us could learn the lesson from that of like, you know, maybe focus on all the good things that are happening instead of the other stuff. You've done a bunch of events for the book at this point. You have some more coming up. As you know, I'm the world's biggest extrovert. So as you can imagine, events, they're a thing that I thrive on. I love doing them. What was your experience of them like? I once heard someone describe a book release event as, quote, like your funeral that you get to attend.
Well, it was more like the wedding that I got to attend. I've never had a wedding, but in the sense that you do see so many people, you know, people that you love, people that you want to hang out with, and you don't have the time to because there's too many people and too many things to do. But all of that said, I absolutely loved the events. I also am a bit of a ham. And again, they were in places where I have friends in DC that were Slatesters, people I talked to for the book, your parents, Jeb, whose books are on the cover and inside the book, and several members of the Off Our Backs collective from my time there in the 1980s, which I didn't expect. It was amazing. In Edinburgh, I was anxious. I keep using that word. I don't know why it's like this fantastic event, but there is anxiety in this process. I was anxious because I knew that people were coming quite a long way to, you know, attend an hour-long event or a 90-minute event. People from my high school, people from college, my UK publisher, they were all coming from England. And I didn't want to either diss them, but also disappoint them. They were spending money, they were spending time on trains, and I wanted to spend time with them. So it involved a lot of careful scheduling and 4 consecutive restaurant meals, but I did get to hang out with most people, and it was fantastic. I absolutely loved it.
That's so awesome. And I know I told you this offline, but there was just like a huge random thing that came up that made it so that I could not come to your book event. And I felt really bad about that. Only, I knew that the event would be full of people. I wasn't worried about that, but I really missed the chance to see you and celebrate you. And I do love the book, and I'm so happy that it's gotten the success that it has in the Rave and the Times and all of that stuff.
Thank you.
One thing I realized in publicizing the book, doing interviews, events, podcasts, things like that, is you begin to figure out like which stories play well and sort of how to tell them, and then there's a real tension that develops because all of a sudden, like you start feeling like the answers are canned and they're maybe not authentic, like this kind of weird script develops in your head. And then sometimes also there's certain questions you get asked, and you're like, I don't want to fucking answer that question anymore,
Yes.
Did you have a similar experience? How are you navigating that tension of kind of remaining authentic while also realizing what bits tend to go over well?
So the thing that I respond to in that question is I found that I was getting on a really weird script. The first few interviews I did, I was much more negative, not only than I wanted to be, but also than I felt. Like the whole book is really optimistic. It's about rejecting the narrative that, lesbian culture is disappearing, that lesbian culture doesn't matter. And I somehow transformed myself into this like grumpy doomsayer. And I had to really like sit with myself and reflect on what I wanted to say and why I was saying this, why was this coming out of my mouth? And I had to remind myself that I could talk honestly about the 6 spaces that the book focuses on without feeling a need to share every negative feeling that I had ever had about those places, which in the first couple of interviews, weirdly, was at least how I experienced it, and I don't know why I got that way, but I was able to get out of it.
It's also funny because you're not like a super negative person.
No.
That's not your affect. That's not your personality, We'll be back with more discussion of the book release process after this.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Former President Donald Trump has rewritten the rules of how the American justice system treats our nation's most powerful people. But long before this year's historic Supreme Court term, or even his presidency, Trump developed an approach to the law that has shielded him from legal accountability on everything from taxes to fraud to discrimination. I'm Dahlia Lithwick. All through August, Amicus will dive deep into Trump's history of bending the law to his will in a series we're calling The Law According to Trump. Hosted by award-winning journalist Andrea Bernstein, the series will highlight the tactics that led to Trump's recurring legal battles and examine the legal blueprint he used to fight back, to better understand how he'll continue to capitalize on his victories and fight to overturn his defeats, whether he does it from inside or outside the White House. Listen to The Law According to Trump on Amicus from Slate.
Hey, it's Carvel Wallace, host of Slate's podcast How To, and we just hit our 5-year anniversary. That's over 250 episodes of life-changing advice on every topic imaginable. And so to celebrate, my co-host Courtney Martin and I recently talked with the show's founder, Charles Duhigg.
We had a guest on once, and we were talking about talking to your kids about sex. And she said, you would never have one conversation with your kids about table manners and then assume that their table manners are going to be good for life, right? Instead, you have like 1,000 conversations with your kids about table manners.
Oh shit, Charles! Now I'm worried I haven't had enough table manners conversations. We definitely talked about sex a lot, but I don't know how much we've talked about table manners.
Just as long as they don't have sex at the table, they're good to go.
So far, so
as long
good.
as they know how to spoon, even if they don't know which spoon to use, it'll totally work out.
Oh man. On How To, we answer your toughest questions with grace, wisdom, and humor, which is why 5 years on, we're still going strong. Listen to How To wherever you get your podcasts.
Listeners, I just want to remind you that if you are enjoying working overtime, please follow so that you never miss an episode. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, we would love you to rate and review the show. And if Overcast is your app of choice, please hit the star to recommend the episode to others.
We're back. You know, June, one thing I love about bringing the creative work out into the world is people opening up about their own experiences with similar things. So like, you know, I did this show about conspiracy theories at BAM, and people would just be like, oh, you know what's one conspiracy theory I actually think is true? I think Paul Wellstone was murdered, or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
And when I did the method, you know, students of those acting teachers that I wrote about would come to the events and they would start sharing their experiences. Then I would sort of turn the mic over to them to be like, yeah, tell me what was Stella Adler like as a teacher, you know, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I found that in many ways the most gratifying part was not talking myself, but actually getting that sort of response, because it really meant the work had touched them in some way. Have you been experiencing that? What's been going on for you?
You know, I haven't had so much of that kind of people haven't been like sharing their memories of specific bars or softball teams or whatever. But there have been similar things that have been quite gratifying. So at one event, I mentioned how in the mid-1970s, this softball team that was actually very politically motivated came up with queer cheers. And I, you know, gave some examples. And I made an aside then about how when you use the word queer in an article or sometimes even in a tweet, there's always some dude, and it is always a dude, who writes in to say that the usage is ahistorical and how the word's an insult and so on and so forth. And that, you know, this example from the 70s was proof that this just wasn't true, apart from all the other reasons that queer is a important and useful word.
I mean, we're here, we're queer, we're fabulous, don't fuck with us, right? That was the thing chanted at a bajillion marches over the course of the 80s. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are several examples, and yet certain people always say that. And afterward, this woman came up to me and said, oh, I was so crazy to hear you say that, because she's just put something out into the world for the first time, and she's just gotten that very response that she hadn't experienced before, and she was really freaked out by it. So it was helpful to her, which made me feel good, but also like that felt like this is the point of books like this, you know, that
right.
We do get to share these experiences. It's not just about historical moments, it's also about how it feels to experience certain things, and that felt like exactly an appropriate example of that.
That's amazing. You have also had your regular life going on in the background. You know, you have a partner, you have a wonderful podcast about the creative process called Working, some people may have heard of. I believe you just are now in the process of moving house. You're trying to figure out your next book. I'm sure there's freelance pieces you want to pitch places. What tricks have you, the most organized person I know, used to find balance within this process between, you know, tending to this thing you've already made, but that's out there in the world and has a lot of demands on your time, and the rest of your life?
Oh, it has been hard, I have to say. I'm glad I've had all these other things to distract me. And I did make some decisions. I did postpone working on the proposal for my next book. I postponed a project that I'm very excited about, but that I just had a feeling, you know what, I'm not going to be fully present for it on the original timetable. Unfortunately, because I spoke up early enough, I was able to change that. But there is a part of me that, again, it's not about the things that you do. It's about the things that you think, am I missing something? Is there something I could be doing to get the word out about A Place of Our Own, 6 spaces that shape queer women's culture? So I'm glad to have these distractions, because I think I would be going a little bit loopy if I was just, you know, what can I do? What can I do? That I think that particular question would get very old. But I am still thinking about it, and I'm trying to do whatever I can do because I want people to read it.
Yes. I want people to read it too. What advice would you give yourself? You know, you've gone into the cardboard time machine in your garage. What are they called? They're not called garages in Edinburgh, right? You said everyone has a, what do they call them?
Well, we've got a lockup.
A lockup, right. Okay, so you go into the lockup. There's a cardboard time machine in there that some kid has built. You go beep, boop, 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 boop. You go back 6 months in time. You appear to yourself. What would you tell yourself 6 months ago about this process? What advice would you give them?
I think I would have tried not to pre-worry. For example, when I got a UK publisher, wonderful thing, publisher has been spectacular, by the way. I was fretting about the UK pub date because I was worried that it was too close to the US pub date and I'd still be busy with US publicity, whatever I was worried about. First of all, if the publishers, the professionals thought this would be okay, that's the end of it, really. They know what they're doing. But mostly, that's an example of while it's good to plan and prepare and game things out, there's no need to concern yourself with things that might not come to pass. That's a general life lesson, though. It's not something that only pertains to publishing a book, but maybe don't have your worries until it's time to worry about them.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that, I would say that, the publishing industry has its own culture, its own rules, its own norms, its own acronyms, its own kind of things that you have to do, and they will often talk to you as if you know what they are. They'll just use a term and expect you to understand what that means.
Have you done your AQ? Yeah,
and you're like, by what? Then that is, of course, the 9,000 page long marketing document we were just talking about. So you should always just ask.
Yeah.
They don't mean to mystify you. They are not trying to leave you in the dark. They are just so used to only talking to other publishing industry professionals about this stuff. And it is 100% okay to ask. It's also 100% okay to ask about the stuff that's stressing you out, to be like, hey, are we sure these 2 release dates aren't going to cause a lot of trouble when it comes to publishing the book? And, they'll probably be like, oh yeah, we already talked about it. It's fine. Or, whatever it is. So the other thing that I would say is you have an agent, you have an editor, they're there to advocate for you in the book. It's totally fine to drop them a line and ask them about that sort of stuff.
I ask my agent so many questions. She's so patient. But yeah, that is really great advice.
Well, on that amazing compliment of my incredible advice-giving skills, that is all the time we have for this week's episode. Let me leave you with one last piece of advice. I think you should follow Working wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have ideas for things we could do better, questions you'd like us to address, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at working@slate.com or give us a ring at 304-933-WORK.
And if you would like to support what we do, sign up for Slate Plus at slate.com/working plus. You'll get bonus content, including exclusive episodes of shows like Slow Burn and Decoder Ring, and you'll be supporting what we do right here on Working.
Before we go, June, will you please tell our listeners one more time your lovely book's lovely title?
Of course, Isaac. My book is called A Place of Our Own, 6 Spaces That Shaped Queer Women's Culture.
Thanks, as always, to Working Overtime's producer, Kevin Bendis, and to our series producer, Cameron Drews. We'll be back on Sunday with a brand new episode of Working, and in 2 weeks, we'll have another Working Overtime. Until then, get back to work.